Hey everyone, I'm Jo Holden. I'm an active conduit for source intelligence and I'm here to help the collective. So, I'm doing a session today that is titled Magic Being a Target, as I am and have been for quite some time now. A more detailed testimony and evidence because I know it can be hard to believe, depending on what level of experience you personally have and or the people around you, what you've been introduced to. I certainly had no background in any of this stuff. The vast majority of people I know on a day-to-day basis think all of this is bunkum, and it can be hard to relate when you've not experienced it personally. And I know when people are like, I'm being attacked, it can be like, okay, how do you know that that is what's happening? How do you know it's not something else? And if people feel they know who's doing it and where it's coming from, like, well, how do you know that? It's all very unseen, and we're talking energetics now, we're talking spiritual and psychic stuff, and um, for reasons I'm going to explain in a minute. Although my initial plan had been to put the videos out that I did, the last couple of weeks, they went out a few days ago. And my intention had been to just get back on track and get back on with the content. I had planned, the reality as a simulation sessions, and it's been a struggle to do that, and I'll explain why in a minute, but that's brought me to this. So I'm gonna split it into two parts because the last two videos I did were very long. And for my own sake in terms of energy levels, and for other people in terms of attention span and what time they've got available, I thought if I do it in two parts it'll just segment it more easily. So this first part's going to cover why I'm recording this, flesh that out a little bit more, and how can I know that this is happening. And then part two, I'll cover how can I know who's doing it, and what are the effects and effects of that in terms of, what's the incoming aspects of it, the processes that are playing out, and what are the effects as in the outcomes from that, and some further info that I've started gathering, I can signpost people to, and um, more information that I'm going to put together about this stuff. So that's the plan. All right, so why I'm recording, as I've just said, I know it can be hard to relate. I've been on the other side of it where when I've mentioned in previous recordings that I had a friend that was involved in the Global Health and Wellness Consortium, and she found herself on the wrong side of Lisa Thomas. She went through a period of being heavily attacked, and it's not that I didn't believe her, but I struggled to know how to help and or support because I couldn't really relate. It was interesting because at the time when she was heavily being attacked, I did have some strange bouts of not feeling great, that didn't seem to have any obvious, reason to have come about. But at the same time, they seemed to pass quite quickly. And it's that sort of the image I'm seeing in my mind is that frog, proverbial frog in a boiling pot sort of thing. It's only been over time as things have really intensified for me that it's become much more present, much more prevalent. I've paid a lot more attention. I've done a lot more research, which has helped me to fully comprehend this stuff. So, and when I say fully comprehend this stuff, I mean in relation to how it's been affecting me. I'm not claiming to be an expert on all aspects of magic because I've never practiced it. So, I can only speak from the point of view of being a target of it, not of being someone who's utilized the principles and the practices of it. But having been in the position where hearing someone else explain and describe how debilitating it's been for them, and not really knowing how best, other than to offer empathy and sympathy and, if there's anything I can do, sort of thing. Other than that, I know it can feel quite you can't help but be dismissive almost, because it's like, what else can I say? What else can I do? So I'm recording this to try to help if people are more interested, if it's something that potentially could be affecting you, or if it's something that the people around you, let's say they get involved in the types of group, that has brought this into my reality. If they do the same, it could potentially be something that can help other people further down the line. So I've been experiencing heightened attacks, which I knew that were going to happen. There's been a pattern even before I started recording to put things out. Every time I had any kind of even personal or private conversation about needing to get on with stuff, and making time to focus and making time to start producing materials, the attacks would ramp up then, which also for me ties into the surveillance side of it, because how would they know? It's that. So I'll talk about that more as we get into stuff. Probably more in part 2 on that side of things. But I knew these. I knew I was gonna, feel the wrath. And that started as soon as I recorded that first intro and a caution about Kim Gug, and that was the case. Having kept that recording and the other couple that I did private initially, what I was trying to do is gain some momentum with the recordings, so that by the time I did put materials out, there'd be enough for people to sort of be working with, let's say, or if anyone that did engage, there'd be enough for them to look at the should these attacks take their toll, because even though I've stated in those previous sessions, I have got a lot better at countering and cleansing, clearing, blocking, stopping. It's taken some learning and some practice to get better at that, so that even though it's happening, I can still just keep moving forwards, even if it's a more steady pace, let's say. Then at least I can still focus enough and find the time and the energy to do that, where there's been periods in the past over this past couple of years really, where I've felt bunkered down. I felt unable to really come out of my stressed states and panic states, and I'll explain more about that when we get into like the symptoms and the effects and whatnot. But I know there's different types of practices that are being used, and there will be another session that I do. I've put next session there, but because I'm doing a part 2 to this, it's not what I'm including in that. After that, I will do a session where I'll talk about like more of an overview of magic as a topic, in terms of what the different types and methods and tools and techniques and how it all kind of fits together. Just more as a information resource, for anyone who's this is completely new to them, and it's not been something they've ever had any reason to look into it. One of the things I've found, because I've had to do my own research, is just how piecemeal it can all be. And one of the things when it comes to my teaching, what I want to hopefully embed within it, is bringing things together in more complete or concise ways, so that instead of it feeling all separate and jumbled, and it taking time to kind of see how it all connects. If I can provide resources where people have that, provided, then great. I'll feel like it's been, time well spent, and there's been some gains from the experience. So I have been feeling derailed, and it's a result of some of the heavy, dark, dense energies I'm on the receiving end of. Because that sense of derailment where I have felt very attached to just getting on and teaching what I feel like I am supposed to be teaching, there can be an underlying feeling of, because I know it's niche content, it's what comes up for me is often a feeling of like, is it really worth all of this aggravation, all of these attacks? Is it really worth it? And I know deep down in, from my organic soul's transmission, it is. I'm very passionate about those subjects, regardless of who else, engages with them. That's not my business. What is my business is that I speak the truth as it's been shown and taught to me, and as I've been guided to learn it. And there'll be a sense of accomplishment and completion for me as and when I can get all of that out of my system. So it's not that I don't think the subjects matter. I do. It's just when I'm in that more stressed state, because there's a lot of nasty sort of energies and entities and whatnot being directed at me, mentally and emotionally, it can be draining, to kind of stay focused and stay on track. So, I've been giving myself a bit of a hard time about that. But in communication with guidance, I was sort of like, what am I supposed to do? It's hard to, I've tried recording the last couple of days, other sessions connected, I wanted to make a start on that holographic session, and I were really struggling to like get into the right frame of mind and bring forward what is to me the appropriate energy for that. It's not supposed to feel like, oh, this was a drag. It's supposed to be like, this is exciting. Like when you see how this all fits together and this is related, I want to be enthusiastic. I want to inspire people to, hopefully see for themselves the relevancy of how that foundational information is ultimately going to help us understand more of what is happening on the planet and what we're experiencing. So it's hard when I feel like I'm really having to kind of push through. So in communication with guidance, I'm like, what am I supposed to do? I feel like exactly what I didn't want to happen has now happened. I was recording in advance to gain that momentum so that I wouldn't get knocked off track. And then for the reasons I explained in the previous two presentations, it felt necessary to take that diversion and explain, the position I'm in and what's been going on. So that being the case, I waiting, for a response, and the response that I felt most strongly was, well, what do you feel you could talk about? And because these heightened attacks have been happening, it's been ramping up ever since I recorded that first session, I believe that was 20th of May. And here we are now on the 11th of June. So ever since then, they've been ramping up. And today is the full moon, the strawberry full moon, which none of that would have ever had any relevancy to me, but I have had to get accustomed to moon cycles with the various types of practices that have been used, because there is absolutely an ebb and flow to how these things are working. And I know, and I will show in this session some of what I'm going to be in store for, and it's already, it's an ongoing thing, but there's different aspects to it, so I'll explain that. So given that that's the case, that's been happening, when guidance asked me, like, what do you feel able to talk about, in a half joking way, I said, magic, given that's all I'm, feeling focused on in terms of what I'm dealing with. And, the response, as you can imagine, was like, okay, go on then. Like, what are you waiting for? Why are you trying to stick to what you had in mind, when this is what's coming up as most relevant, most important? So I was like, okay. So I spent the last couple of days putting, these materials together, and maybe I just need to lighten up a little bit and be a bit more flexible with, rather than trying to do things in a scheme of work sort of fashion, because that's, the background, that's what I'm used to. Maybe I just need to accept that whatever content I create, it's going to be relative and relevant to whatever I'm experiencing at the time. So, yeah, best thing I could do is explain more about the magic side of things. It might actually help someone. I have only touched upon it previously, and just saying I'm being attacked is not the same as, laying it out in a more detailed fashion. So that's why I'm recording this session. Okay, so how can I know this is happening? So I've put in brackets there, all of these things coincide. There is a synchronistic and interconnected sum total effect of these things. And I can understand for anyone who is perhaps less energetically sensitive and or has never actually been targeted, and who possibly has a much more, orthodox view of how reality operates and functions. I can understand how most of these, all of these possibly, in isolation, you might go, well, maybe that's just a, heart issue you've got there, or maybe, you need to seek mental health help. Like, I can understand how people could potentially perceive this to be, figments of my imagination. I know they're not. And when you combine all of these different elements of the experience, plus the various, types of research I've now done, and I've found out so much more about just how prevalent this is and just how much evidence there is for it, symbiotically it kind of comes together as a more complete picture and evidence base. So, physical symptoms. This is like an ongoing, I've been for days on end now, really since I recorded that first, the intro caution video. Can be a feeling of pressure, if things are being projected towards. In various chakra centers, what I have noticed is my solar plexus and my heart center seem to be the ones most targeted. It can feel like burning, and it's coming from the outside. It's not like oh, you've got heartburn kind of feeling, or oh, you've got stitch, like, it's not that. It's not internal. It's coming from external, but it does feel trained. It feels very targeted to those areas. And if it's stuff being projected at me, that burning sensation, it almost feels like an irritation, an agitation. I can find that emotionally there's like a burning anger that I can feel. And that combined with some of these other symptoms where it's what can happen, that'll start, and then I'll feel like pressure as if something's like pressing either on my crown, or sometimes it feels like over this area, and I'll get a ringing in my ear. And those feelings of pressure in combination with that burning feeling that if I don't consciously counter it and I don't consciously rebut, rebuke, refuse, return to sender, and or there's other practices I can do that require it's a more meditative state that I have to enter, and there's some breath work exercises I can do, and what I've found is that can open that area, but as opposed to it allowing more penetration, what comes through is more organic light that will counter it, that will press it back, that will, and if it goes on for a period of time, it can be very much a tug of war, push pull sort of feeling, as that energy is trying to essentially influence, intervene, what's the word I'm looking for, like infiltrate sort of feeling. As that's trying to do that and I'm pressing back, it can build up and build up to a point where it feels like there is a almost like explosion of something's got to give, which even as I'm describing this now, I'm seeing images of the Harry Potter with the ridiculous. Never thought I'd be talking to people about this, but so that can happen. That does require my conscious, effort to do that. But I feel like over time with practice, I've become more effective at doing that, and it does feel like it, sort of returns to sender or sends away, or it doesn't feel like a diffusion. In fact, the diffusion sort of techniques that I use, or transmutation, those types of techniques tend to be more connected to when, as I've put here, there can also be times when I feel like a really deep sadness. So I'll talk about that a little bit more in a sec, but with the burning anger thing, I was talking about the pressure on the head and the ear ringing, or sometimes it's like over the third eye. It feels like something's trying to block or stop my connection to high self, highest guidance source, whoever, whatever you interpret that connection to be. But it feels like they're trying to do that, and that is when I can get like racing thoughts. I can feel very scrambled. Everything feels quite scattered. It's like hard to kind of pull my awareness into a state of focus, which is why I've come to practice now more of the meditative sort of, really center myself, and have to, essentially counter what's being done to reassert my energetic authority, if you like, while that's happening. So there can be the attacks that feel more like pressure, pressing, projection, things coming at me. And same with like the pressure, it's almost like something's trying to sort of grip or block my crown, or sometimes more like the front of my head. The pulling, that's more vampiric, that's more like drainage, as if, and sometimes, when is it just an everyday expression, we'll go, oh, my heart bleeds, oh, my heart bleeds for you. Well, if you think of any occasion where you have actually been genuinely heartbroken about something, you can have that feeling of like, there's such a weight, there's such a deep sadness that it does feel like your heart is bleeding. It does feel like, like there's a puthering, like there's that much tension, that much upset, whatever it is that's caused it, and you can have that like sense of you can hardly believe this thing, whatever that thing is, has happened. That I don't know if brain fog is the right word, but it's almost that like surrealness, like disbelief, like when the for lack of a better expression, siphoning is happening, or the harvesting. I don't know what the best word for it is. Under the overarching sort of methods and methodologies, it would come under the vampirism. So when that's happening, that's when I feel that deep sadness. That's when I can just feel like, whereas the racing thoughts and the scattered feeling is more as things are being projected, as my energy's being pulled on, it's more like a disconnect, like when you hit that point where you just like, oh, I can't even be bothered to think about this anymore. Like I just need to switch off. It's that kind of feeling. So what do I do in response to that? Again, I've got different techniques. It depends. I'm much quicker at picking up on it now because one of the issues that I've had previously, as I mentioned in the intro, it's that proverbial frog in the boiling pot thing. Things before I fully recognized what was happening, things had got to a point where a whole lot of work had already been done. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that with the various astral attacks that I've had. But some of those attacks have also been warnings, have been signs, have been the setup for other things to come. I didn't know that because I didn't know anything about any of these practices. So looking back, I did have warning signs. Had I had the knowledge, I would have known what to do in response to it, but I didn't then, I do now. And so when I'm being heavily attacked in the astral, I pay attention to that, and sometimes those attacks are enough to wake me up in the moment that they're happening. And I know how to clear, cancel, delete, cancel any agreements, contracts, bonds, binds, seals, sigils, like cleanse, clear, uncreate, refute, refuse, rebuke, all of that. And I'm much more on the ball in doing so, but I didn't know that for quite a long time. So with the emotional state, as you can imagine, there's a whole lot of if something's pulling from you, there needs to be cord cuttings, there needs to be, again, clear, cancelling, deleting. I do have a method similar to what I've just described when something's being projected at me that I will utilize to reassert myself, my soul transmission, and push that back. When there is a siphon that's happening, I can utilize similarly that same light transmission, but in a much more lasered sort of way to burn away whatever it is that's attaching, whatever it is that. And one of the things I've really had to learn to do as well is to, do a sort of energetic body scan, if you like, because at one point there were that many bonds and binds, and I felt utterly entangled and trapped in certain respects, and it was hard to know where to even begin to unpick and unpack and delete and cut and burn and cleanse and clear. I just felt like I'd literally been bound, and it was like as I were trying to do the sort of energetic cleansing and clearing, I'd find myself getting, there'd be another trap or something stuck, or blockage, or so I've had to become much more consciously aware of where I can feel. I've mentioned here that there can often be this pinching sensation, and when we talk more about like the various forms of magic and the methods and stuff they use, I think those pinching sensations are more to do with what they would class as sympathetic magic, which is representative. So they'll use dolls or puppets or sigils or anything that is an object, an item that is designed to represent whatever the target is, and they use other processes first to essentially attach your essence or will or consciousness in some way, shape or form. It depends which plane of your existence, or planes if it's plural, the targeting. There's various ways they can do that. I'm not going to go into a full explanation now, because that's why I want to do that session where I can really lay it out in more detail. But they'll do those preliminary processes first, and then once that attachment is there, then there is at their disposal any and all types of ritual, which some, under baneful, it can be to inflict pain, it can be to stick pins in or whatever. It can be that. It can be humiliation sort of rituals where they'll use that symbolic representation of the target, and I don't want to be too graphic and disgusting about it, but they'll smear feces and stuff, anything to create the energetic coding, if you like, that is then connected to that target, to that being, so that if that target, that being, is not aware to cleanse, clear, cancel, delete, counter, return to sender, if they haven't got that awareness to do that, then over time, in some cases, it depends how skillful the practitioner is. It depends how practiced they are at doing certain types of rituals. But in some cases, there can be immediate effects. In other cases, it can take time to build up. But eventually, as these various practices are being used more and more, that's the energy that's flowing towards that person. And so more and more their life can start to take a bit of a lot of a downward turn spiral. It's really very nefarious. So that's that pinching sensation. I've mentioned about the burning, bleeding sort of feeling in the chakra centers, which correspond with the pressing and the pulling. Imposing presence in personal space, that happens all the time. That's why I've highlighted it, this feeling of it can be directly in my personal space, as in some sort of entity quite literally like abusing me, but like in a the intrusive thoughts and thought forms, it like I've literally had where what I can hear in my mind is someone insulting, and or I'm just going to say it's it's not pleasant to hear it, but it's why don't you just kill yourself? Just kill yourself. You should just kill yourself. It's like that. Now I know anyone listening to this, again, if you're more, let's say, conventionally minded, you might hear me describe that and say, you really ought to go and get that checked out. But I want you to just stop and think for a second. Number one, I'm sure you can tell I am capable of discerning and articulating truth from fiction. I know my own inner voice. I know what my voice sounds like. It's not that I'm hearing. Why would I be, if it was my own mental state, why would I be telling myself to kill? It would, the correct terminology in that case would be, I'm just going to kill myself. I'm going to kill myself. Why would it be, why don't you just kill yourself? Why would it be that? I know it's not my energy. And when I have had those intrusive thoughts, honestly, this is going to sound weird, but I've got to a point where I laugh now. It used to unnerve me, it used to upset me, and it didn't start initially with it being that sort of close to me. It used to feel more like a monitoring spirit. It felt like I was being watched. And it feels like the stronger I've been getting, the more whoever, whatever. And again, when we do the session on the different types of magic and stuff, it's not necessarily a demon, could be, but there are many different types of beings that, like lower density beings, that are not necessarily, it's a difficult one because when I talk about demon, to me, what a demon stands for is a deliberately evil manipulator of organic nature, as an acronym. That in my materials, when I talk about angels and demons, I use angel as an acronym for something, and demon to me is any being, any entity that is deliberately evil and manipulating what our true organic nature is. So in that respect, you could argue that any lower density being, whether it's a negative spirit that's not gone towards the light, or whatever we're supposed to be doing these days, if the soul recycling thing's done, it's hard to know how much of that new age information is true, but could it just be a negative being that was once a human being that's just still lingering around? Could it be that? Possibly. Could it be, you'll see in the different types of magic, in different traditions, they'll talk about servitors. They tend to be more in the Western traditions. Servitors are, negative entities that can be recruited, and you essentially give them a job, you employ them, and they have certain tasks that they carry out for you. Because from what I can gather, the higher ranking practitioners will contract with actual demons, as in the type that you might read about in, more, I don't know, so ancient scripture or biblical texts, or, the big guns, let's say. I think you have to have a certain rank yourself to be able to work with them, from what I can see, from what people have been sharing, in terms of teachings around this stuff. So if you're possibly not a practitioner who's at that level where you're gonna, because there's two things. There's whether you qualify to even be able to kind of recruit their involvement in your schemes, in your rituals. There's that side of it. There's also, are you willing to pay the price to work with them? Because even if you've got the rank and you've got the capability, the magical strength, let's say, to handle working with them, again, I'm going on testimonies here of, other people that have shared information about this, beyond the getting them to work with you, there's a price to pay, there's sacrifice needed. You can, I guess, from what people have said, have to agree to certain types of blood contract. So, you're putting yourself up as collateral, or someone close to you up as collateral, if whatever you've recruited them to do, if it turns out, it can't be done for some reason, then you've still got to somehow quote unquote pay. So, this this is the kind of stuff I've spent months now learning about to try and understand why. Honestly, that kind of stuff became relevant because I couldn't quite understand why what is being done so incessantly and so committedly. It's like, what? Why won't you just stop? But if there has been any contracts made of that kind, it kind of makes sense why whoever's responsible and whoever's involved is feeling the need to see it through, get it done. But so I was talking about, I don't know necessarily that intrusive, that imposing presence. I don't know necessarily that would be classified as a demon, but at the same time, I have noticed it's taken more and more liberties. Let's say it's got more and more aggressive in terms of how imposing it is being as I've been coming out of the worst of some of the effects that these attacks have had. So I think, I wouldn't call it desperation necessarily, but it definitely seems that there's more pressure on anybody and everybody involved, including, the non-physical entities, to do whatever it is ultimately that they are trying to do. So I have, as I've said, I have got to a point now where it used to really upset me having that presence and that, particularly that sort of sentiment being spoken to me. I used to feel very fragile. Not so much anymore. Now I'm getting the handle of things and I'm getting the gist of what I need to do. It doesn't mean it's not unpleasant, of course. I'm not suggesting I'm enjoying this now. It's not like that, but there's nothing worse than feeling powerless, and I don't feel powerless anymore. It doesn't mean I feel like I'm all powerful. There's still stuff that I will be spending tonight doing prayer and protection, and it's not a case of I've got myself to a point where I'm just like bring it on. It's I'd rather not be dealing with this. I really would rather not be dealing with this, but it's happening. So okay, so as you can imagine, depending on how imposing that presence is, how much either what's being projected at me or how much I've felt, because a lot of that sort of vampirism I've noticed now is happening more and more when I'm in dream state, so essentially unable to sort of protect and defend myself. So I'm waking up, but like I am being given alerts, and some of the dreams that I'm having are letting me know that this is happening. So, and then there's also other types of attacks that have been happening that I'm going to share a couple of descriptions in a more detailed sense, so that instead of it all sounding quite vague and then this and then that and then this and that, I want to explain a couple of actual encounters, let's say, that I've had, so you can get the gist of what some of the more extreme attacks have looked and felt like. So astral dream state, there's been a heavy quantity and quality of what I believe, I could be wrong here, but I think the most appropriate term for this is lucid dream, as in your conscious awareness is active while you're in dream state. So rather than it be a dream you wake up from and then you've got a memory of it and you're kind of trying to piece together, oh, and then I think this happened, and it's you wake up your conscious mind observes and experiences the dream as it's happening in real time. So those attacks, I said, I'm going to show you some examples. These are videos I recorded earlier because I really wasn't sure how much worse things were going to get today with it being full moon day. So I thought if I can save myself some time by, you know, segmenting this, I'm not having to try to explain everything all at once. If I'm feeling like I'm really struggling, if, you know, even as I'm talking to you now, I can feel pressure on my throat as if I'm not, you know, as if there's a effort, an attempt to prevent me from speaking and articulating. And the heart area is not feeling too bad right now, but that I did a whole cleansing before I started recording. So, you know, it's in preparation, I thought if I can record some of the stuff earlier, then I will, and I'll piece it together. So I've done that. So in terms of astral, they are examples of these astral attacks that I'm talking about, and the lucid dream element of it being like me observing these things playing out. So in a general sense, these astral attacks, they can take different forms. There's often been a story, let's say, playing out where as I've come to be aware of the dream, as I've woke up in the dream, I'm being chased. And at times it's not just felt like I'm just trying to get away from someone. So there's been somewhere I'm being chased, but I'm like hiding. So there's times that I'm like hiding under you know, like when there's streams and there's small bridges. A more recent one was I was sort of hiding. It was like a bridge, but almost like a small tunnel, and I was hiding in there, and there were people above, like looking for me, and I was sort of submerging myself under the water, under the bridge to stay away from them. But then there's other times where it's like so in that I was sedentary, right? I'm hiding. But the hunted is there's times where I've woke up in dreams and I'm like literally running for my life, and I've got, you know, different entities or persons pursuing me. There's been a lot of like random dreams about just being attacked either verbally or physically, but it'll be like a wake up in the dream. The verbal tends to tie in more with a lot of past people showing up in dreams, which I now know, having listened to practitioners and or people who have been on the receiving end of, and there's not enough people out there describing their experiences as a target, as being on the receiving end of this stuff, because there's only been a few examples I've been able to find of people that have explained in any kind of detail what they have experienced. But one I did come across, and I've put some playlists together, and I'll show you guys, you know, when we get to the further info part of it. I want to share just to show people just how much information is out there, but how many people are, one, practicing this stuff, and two, being affected by this stuff. But I've put some of her material on those playlists. So there's a magic like info playlist, there's a magic advice, which when it comes to more the protection side of it and the cleansing and stuff, I've put stuff on there that can actually help people. And then magic testimonies, which is more people who, some are still involved, but others who previously had been involved in, you know, they were witches and warlocks and high priests and priestesses and all of that kind of stuff. People who previously had, you know, a lot of experience with it, who've chosen a different path. You know, many have converted over into some religious kind of pathway, but have talked at length about, you know, the types of things that they did, what they were involved in, who they were connected to in terms of how this all ties in with various global networks, which is interesting, but it's also important, I think, for us to wrap our heads around this. Anybody that's really on this awakening path, this has been the steepest learning curve for me, you know, and I'm still fighting my way out of it. So, you know, I do think it's important for us to be aware of, but I feel like I've got off on, like, lost my train of thought now. I forget why went off on that. Oh yeah, the past people thing. So one of the people that'll be on one of or each of those playlists, I think her channel name is something like Ocean Speaks. She talks about being targeted, and she talks about different types of magic that are used. And one of them is what the class as root work. So it's bindings, but it's a way to basically hold people back by binding them to their past, so that, you know, their life, rather than it moving forwards onto new chapters and clean slates and energetically, whether that's mentally, emotionally, you know, in the physical, as in like financially or health wise, what these practitioners will use these binding and root work spells to attach people to like an old version of themselves, basically, so that they can't then grow and develop and move on. And when I heard her talking about that, that made so much sense as to why all of a sudden people from my past that I've not had bad dreams about ever, and there's no emotional connection still there. It's, you know, I've moved on many years ago, and so have they, and there hadn't been any hard feelings. But what I've found during this period is these recurring dreams of becoming aware of the dream, like waking up in the dream, and it's been one of these people or another. And interestingly, I'm mentioning this because it could be, you know, I believe it's relevant. These are all people that if you went back on my social media channels, more specifically Facebook, you would be able to find photos of me with these people. So there's other people I've been involved with that they haven't shown up in these dreams. So I think what's happened here is there's been some, you know, cyber stalking that's gone on, and these practitioners are using what they can find. You know, you can expect or assume that if someone's had a relationship and then that's ended for some reason, potentially there could be some trauma around that, there could be a wound, there could, you know, that. So it seems to me as if what's happened is they've looked for different ways that they might be able to, like, undermine my sense of peace, my sense of well-being. And so what showed up in some of these astral attacks that I've experienced as these lucid dreams has been a figure of someone from my past, but saying, you know, the nastiest things. And what's strange about it, which relates to what I've just said, it's stuff that, you know, I know the relationship I had with that person. I know that person, and they know me. It's stuff they would never say to me because there's no grounding for it. There's no basis for it. It's not true. It's not something they would ever feel the need to call me or accuse me of, or, you know. So again, why do I assume then it's an attack versus just a bad dream? For these reasons, because it doesn't make any sense. At the time when, you know, that relationship was ending, I didn't have these types of dreams. It's not like I were all up in my head, like, do they hate me? You know, like everything. I've always had a very balanced psychological and emotional understanding of what's happening and why it's happening. And, you know, does it mean I'm like always in a perfect state of peace with everything. No, of course I go through ups and downs like everybody else in life, but never to the point where, you know, I've had the types of dreams that have been showing up this past couple of years, like never, that's never happened before, even when I've been going through the hardest, you know, emotional sort of upsets. So that being run off the road, that has been a regular, I say regular, maybe 3 or 4 times over the last couple of years, but it's been a recent one. You know, the most recent time that happened was very recently. And in the dream, again, I wake up to observe, and rather than be actually in my astral sort of body experiencing it first person, it's like I'm observing my car driving down the road and then something coming along and colliding and like basically running me into a wall or off the road. But it's graphic enough, it feels real enough that as I wake up, you know, again, sort of have to do a whole lot of refuting, refusing, clearing, cleansing, cancelling any agreements, because a lot of this stuff as well, if you don't sort of counter it, it's almost an acceptance, which, you know, when we talk about the approaches to magic and stuff, I'll explain more as to how that can be, because a lot of it seems unfair, right? When you think about it, a lot of this stuff, people having the ability to affect other people and disturb their lives and their well-being, and you know, it seems so wrong that the capability within the functionality of how reality operates, that would be possible, that, you know, it's quote unquote allowed. But everything that can happen spiritually and energetically, there's representation of it, there's reflections of it in how things operate in the physical. And what I mean by that is our systems, as we know, that operate upon implied consent. If we don't refuse them, refute them, block, stop, disagree, you know, if we don't do anything to counter them, then of course these systems grow and their reach expands, and before we know it, we find ourselves in situations where, you know, as a species, we've been oppressed and suppressed. And the same is true spiritually. If anything, what's true in the physical is a representation, it's a reflection of what has always been the case spiritually, energetically. And I mean that in the sense of these systems have been designed to reflect. You know, it took me a long time to realize just how significant that is, which hopefully throughout the sessions, as it comes up, if I can keep re-emphasizing that, the significance of it will also, you know, the dots will connect for others too, because it is so, our strength comes spiritually first before we can really truly reassert ourselves in the physical. So yeah, that's a tangent. All right, so being run off the road, that's happened a few times. Being blocked and trapped, so there's been times where in dreams, and these tend to, for some reason, involve me and my children, but my children at younger ages, which again seems to tie back to this whole root work binding thing, because it's like pulling me back to the past. But I've had dreams of me being with my children, and we're trying to get somewhere, and there's some sort of blockage, stoppage, and these can be things like we literally run out of road, like we've been going in a certain direction, and then all there is like a dead drop, you know, like the road ends and we're going nowhere. It can be that kind of feeling, or, you know, same feeling. that is what I've experienced, that's what I've witnessed, that's what I've observed in the dream. But the feeling then is, you know, being sort of blocked or trapped, or like there's nowhere I can go. I'm at the end of the road here, sort of thing. Sometimes being trapped is a more literal, like I'm in a space I can't get out of, which I do have a little bit of claustrophobia, so that those dreams when I wake up I always feel very panicked by. Being stolen from quite a lot. And just so you know, I've not gone throughout my life having regular bad dreams. So in the last couple of years, these are all themes of dreams that have happened. Some once or twice, others multiple occasions, but there's stolen from, there's been it's typically either my car, as in my vehicle to get anywhere, or my purse, wherever I am. You know, these tend to be when I'm in the dream, I'm in some sort of, you know, public space, or some sort of like a bar or a restaurant, or and my purse is gone and I can't find my purse, and you know, it like there's a whole panic thing that kicks in. Talked about the past people showing up. Uh, Pressure to eat and drink. So there's been dreams where I've literally been woken up as if by assistance, by guidance, to prevent me, because my awareness has come online, for lack of a better expression, and it's literally as something's being fed to me, and somehow, some way, higher guidance, higher self, something has been like, wake up, like stop, don't do it. So again, having listened to different testimonies on things, there appears to be this, again, is that implied consent. If you accept something that's being given to you, then whatever the infusion is, because again, there's practices that happen first where they'll take a representation of something, and it can be toxic, poisonous, it can be something that's gonna you know, bring on some sort of like mental derangement, or you know, some sort of obsessive kind of compulsive reaction, or you know, there's all different types of effects that when you listen to the people that have been involved, they claim they've successfully created when they've done these works. So you know, I can only assume that they're telling the truth about that. So that's what these dreams appear to be about, trying to get you to eat or drink, you know, consume something that has been infused with some malicious intent. Being kissed and touched against my will or inappropriately, and at times I swear because again, that's a similar sort of thing where it's like higher guidance, higher self is sort of like, come out of this now. And on a few occasions, there's been this feeling of I've actually physically felt as if something has inappropriately touched me. As I've woke up, I felt the presence of something that's been touching me, which is creepy, as you can imagine. So these are all stuff that's been going on. These are what, when I say astral attacks, these are what I'm talking about. So the external in real life, corresponding with these, everything I've just described, you know, the physical symptoms, the emotional states, the psychological sort of intrusions, the stuff, especially when stuff's heavy in the astral, when it's happening, you know, like it's hard to average it, because this is where it sort of seems to tie in with moon cycles and stuff. But around this point, you know, it's full moon tonight, and because it's a strawberry moon, which I don't exactly know what that means, but I do know it's supposed to maintain its kind of powerful amplification capabilities for the extra time. So it's supposed to be for the next 3 days. I think it's supposed to be like full force, amplifying whatever you're drawing on the lunar energy for. But so at the minute, I'm literally every night I'm being sometimes more than once pulled out of dream state because this stuff's happening. But corresponding with that, there can and has been periods of time where everything that could go wrong has and does go wrong. Like anything that can break, you name it, like cooker, washer, hob, fridge, freezer, car issues. I'm not going to go into a long with the description, but there were one dream of that I'd had of being run off the road, and the very next day I was using my car. The long story, but the weirdest fault came on it, but it ended up with like diesel leaking out the bottom of it, and I had to abandon the car, get the council, let them know that the diesel had leaked on the road, and get breakdown to come and help me out, and it was just a whole thing. And that was the day after dreaming of being run off the road. My daughter, because this has not only affected me, and I've tried not to make it, it seem like it's a really big deal to my children, because I don't want them to be scared. I don't want them to feel paranoid about stuff. But she told me about a dream she'd had at the time, she was living with me, and she'd had a dream. Her bedroom where we lived was in loft. We've moved from there now. But she'd had a dream very much like this, very lucid, where she was being chased, and she'd woke up like within the dream in her bedroom, and she said she'd felt and heard like footsteps on the roof of the house, and she could hear voices, and they were saying, "We can't find her." And in her dream, she'd run down like the 2 flights of stairs to get away from what was going on. She went and hid in what at the time that house had a conservatory, so she'd hidden in the conservatory. The very next day after she had that dream, one of the roof tiles fell off the roof, landed on top of the conservatory, and cracked the whole roof of the conservatory. I said the whole roof, like it were a large conservatory, so that section of the roof of the conservatory. But you can't make it up, it's like, wow. So how strange for, things happen, I get it, houses need maintaining, I get it. But how strange that the very next day after my daughter had had that dream and dreamt that there were people on the roof, that happened. The very next day after I'd dreamt I'd been run off the road in my car, I had a very dangerous fault. The person that came connected to, the breakdown service were like, "I've never known this. I've never, like, what? How has this happened?" So it's strange circumstances, and as I've said, there's been periods of time where everything just, the expense that racks up every time, and you feel like you're getting on top of things, some other major, the boiler goes, and I'm not just saying that generally, like that were another thing that broke down. And so in the external, in real life, there's that kind of stuff that you're dealing with. You're also, and I know, these things happen in real life as well. You don't necessarily, doesn't have to be that you're being targeted by any kind of dark magic. At the same time, the odds of so many things going wrong in such a short space of time seems extreme, particularly as I've just explained, when it ties in, like, what are the odds of dreaming that and then that happening, has caused some issues. When I say relationship issues, it's like in some respects it's very isolating, because a lot of people, they don't understand this stuff, they're not experiencing it, they've had no reason to ever research or look into any of it, and so they can't relate. And for some people, if they can't relate to something, they could possibly ask more questions and try to understand. A lot of people, that's not the case. A lot of people, it interrupts their little bubble of how reality works and what is real and what is true. And I get it, it's not like I want to force it down anybody's throat. At the same time, when you're dealing with all this stuff, if you ask me how I am, all I can do then is pretend that everything's fine and just keep the narrative going of what you expect from me. I can't. If I answer honestly, if it's something you don't want to know about, it can't really go any further. And I have noticed as well, particularly when the attacks have been really bad, that some of the people around me that potentially, I'm speculating, I can't know what's going on inside their hearts and minds, but some of their behaviors towards me, some of the, like, what to me has been uncalled for, like anger or judgmentalism, or I felt attacked at times by people who I've had long-standing relationships with. And in this period of time, this last couple of years especially, there's been I'm going to say so many times, it's not really about the quantity, it's the quality of who it's come from. People that have loved and trusted and supported and only ever wanted us to have a good relationship. Every relationship has its ups and downs, but I've had no desire to draw a line under or end our connection. But there's a couple of people especially I've had to do that with, because there were regular occasions where the way they spoke to me, the way they spoke about me, the way they reacted in the moment, if I were trying to not even talk about this stuff, just express myself, like about something else, the agitation. And it's an instinctive thing more so than a, can't say for definite I know this to be the case, but it almost has felt like a negative influence goading and guiding that from them. That's how it's felt. Which, I'm not going to turn around to someone and be like, you're possessed. Yeah, that would be an exaggeration. I'm not saying they were possessed, but it has felt very like, the safest thing I can do is keep my distance from you. If that's how, it's like they don't necessarily understand everything I'm dealing with, but I don't need that. I don't need to be on the receiving end of that too. It's felt like that. So, um, which is saddening in and of itself, because obviously these are people I have and do care about, but life has mysterious ways, and things hopefully at some point will balance back out. When the attacks are very regular, I also do seem to get a whole lot of weird, random stranger messages and stuff, which, I just ignored. That's not a big deal, but I've just noted it. It's like, interesting that, well, I'm having these dreams and I'm waking up and feeling all this pressure and or drainage, and like, well, all that's happening. Some, I don't want to be disrespectful, because there might be actual genuine people, or there might just be scam artists just trying to get me to sign up for some sort of trading account or something. I don't know. But like, hey, how are you? And there's always, like half a dozen in a day that you're just like, it's weird. It's weird that it all seems to happen together. Tech issues and glitches. Yeah, I mean, again, I know these things part and parcel of life, but everything seems to ramp up, you know? And then lack of productivity. Sure, you can imagine. I feel like I'm spending way more time than I would like to, than I would choose to, just chasing my own tail, trying to maintain some degree of well-being, wellness, balance, optimism in my own life. And I don't say this stuff to be dramatic. I just want people to be aware of what some people are being subjected to, you know, because it's unbelievably uncalled for as well. I can't speak for everybody, you know. I've seen enough testimonies from certain, let's say, baneful practitioners that will argue that, you know, get yourself on the wrong side of a witch or a wizard or whatever, and you know, this is what you get. I suppose it's open to interpretation then what getting yourself on the wrong side of these people constitutes, because I don't feel like I've done anything to put myself deliberately, intentionally, negatively on anybody's wrong side. So, you know, all the people who I know are involved with this stuff are people I've been nothing but good to. So, you know, that's my story. How other people may have ended up suffering this stuff, I don't know, but I still think it's cowardly, you know, that honestly, if these are the kind of practices you've got to stoop to, there's a deficiency. That's my view of it. If you can't do things directly and, you know, challenge the person in whatever way seems most appropriate, if you can't do that up front, anything you might be quote unquote gaining from it or getting away with or whatever it is, to me, I've no respect for someone that has to do things behind somebody's back or underhandedly. If you've got to cheat or you've got to steal or you've got to do something that the other person is defenseless against, you're a coward. There's no strength in that. You might feel powerful in the moment, but it's a sign of weakness as far as I'm concerned. So moving on. All right. So the external in real life, I've emphasized here, talking about things breaking, being lost, relationship issues, loss, lack of productivity. So I just want to play you a very short clip. This is taken from there's a channel called Life is Spiritual. Erica Mukisa, I think is how you say her surname. And this is her husband who's interviewing her. He's a pastor. Erica was a witch, came from a pretty, let's say, powerful and established sort of witchcraft background. Were trained in all sorts of stuff, and this is her in one of her videos. They've done a whole series. There's lots of content that they have, and they've done a whole series where she talks about all the different aspects and elements to different things she were involved with. Some of it, honestly, it's mind-blowing. It's like I've been experiencing all the stuff I've just described, and I was still like, really? That's possible? No, surely not. You know, like it's hard to imagine some of it, but this is her talking about being taught to trap souls.
It's not affected.
Oh, it does not go out.
Yes, it doesn't go out. So now they taught me how to trap souls. that lady now, that is the following day, she said, you have to learn how to create a web. I don't know how to explain it, but a web, something like, you can see it like the way you see the spider web. Eh? Yeah. You can trap a soul of somebody in that web, and the person dreams when they are moving, but they are not getting to their destination. They are doing things, but they are not full, like accomplishing. Like, you keep them stagnant, doing the same thing, but no progress. But they are working so hard. But the more they work hard, the more they go back to square one. So she taught me how to do that. And how to do that is by capturing a person's spirit. And how do I capture a person's spirit is by involving in a quarrel or a fight with that person. And when I would involve myself in a fight or quarrel with that person, I tell that person, you will see. And when that person, when I tell them, you will see, they say, see what? Who do you think you are? And me, the only response is, you will see. So that night, because they have opened their lives to that attack by quarreling, when a person is at that point of life, they are at zero level. They are vulnerable in the spiritual realm. So I would target at night. They are just thinking about me, meditating about the bad things I have done, the bad words I have spoken, how I am the one who invoked the fight, you know. So that night they have a bad dream. In that dream, if they don't wake up to pray and cancel it, that is the end of them. Because whatever they are going to do, they are going to be struggling. Because me, I would go to that shrine, I call their spirit, and I cage it in that web. So that is an evil forest, a forest of herbs. Yeah. Yes. So I would cage. There are people who have been caged in trees. There are people who have been caged in places. So a person does whatever they are doing. They work so hard. They are struggling to make it in life, but nothing they do materializes. Even if they are given money in the morning, by evening they don't have the money and they have nothing to show for that money. Wow.
Okay, so what she's describing there obviously sounds horrific. It resonates with me. That has felt like the last couple of years of my life. I, having listened to other practitioners, I don't think getting someone in their feelings, you know, in a angry sort of state is necessarily the only way to initiate or invoke. I think, you know, when in the part 1 of the Kimposter videos, when I said there's all sorts of ways of creating different bonds and binds, and I think we can be tricked into freely giving access to ourselves through having trust and faith in people. And I do believe getting people then into negative states can help with the siphoning side of it, which makes sense for the style of some of Kim's content. She does seem to like to do this whole, you know, oh, this is how bad the deep state are, these are all the horrible things they wanted to do to you, and this is all the things they've been actually doing and trying to do, and, you know, get people all worked up. But then, of course, presents herself as like the one thing stopping all the bad stuff. And so then people, you know, naturally then have oh, thank you, Kim, and there's this outpouring of emotion. And I think that's all part of the design. I do. So that's the soul trap thing, which I'm gonna share with you a couple of recordings of what I said about the astral attacks. These are not what I would associate with soul trapping. I think there's other practices that have been done. I think these attacks were supposed to be to get me to give up altogether on pursuing what I'm doing now. I think those attacks, that's what that were about. I think the soul trapping thing has been to aid and assist with that aim, in the sense of the tireder you feel, the more you feel like the harder you try, the more you seem to sink. You know, like, you know, I'm getting nowhere. It's like that feeling of tires in mud sort of thing. I'm just getting stucker and stucker. I think that's the soul trap side of it, and you know, I've been experiencing that. But I think these other attacks that I'm going to describe that I've experienced were more supposed to be to kind of just finish me off in like a I give in kind of way, which it'll make more sense when we get to them. There is one more clip of Erica I just want to show you there. She's talking in this next clip more specifically about how she was taught by through her lineage. It was her grandmother that was her sort of mentor, if you like, her teacher. But she, by the sounds of it, was highly accomplished and very well connected to, you know, some very powerful people where Erica came from. But they taught her how she could essentially use her feminine guiles to attract the attention of, you know, a male counterpart, but essentially use him until she'd drained him of any and all resources, and then could dispose of and repeat the process. So she's talked about it in that context, but the reason I've included it is I don't see it as like just a female to male thing. I see it as the same mentality and the same capability applies for anybody that gets, let's say, noticed or is identified in some way to have something worth stealing, something worth draining from them. It seems to me like, you know, the principles could apply in other contexts, is what I'm saying. So let me just move on to that. Yeah.
It's not affecting me on how to do it. She said, you can enslave a man who has money and he starts working for you. He just gives you a car, he gives you a house, he gives you everything, transferring it in your names, and you don't have to suffer. So he's the one to suffer for you. And when you're done with him, you can either kill him or trap his spirit in a web. So he become useless. Even if he wants to fight back and own everything that he gave you, you're now more powerful than him. He is useless.
That is wickedness.
Yeah, so...
Yeah, it is. Okay, so this is me describing what I believe was it was an astral attack, but I believe was a form of a death magic or death ritual that had been done. I'll let you listen and then I'll tell you more details. Hey everyone, so this is the description of the death magic dream that I had in May of 2023. I say I had, it happened to me, but this is one of the more extreme experiences that I've had in this whole ordeal that has been going on for some time now. So early May 2023, I'd have to go back and look and check out how that ties in with moon cycles and stuff, but I do know that there's some sort of significance to early May in terms of some kind of astrological cycle, you know, that seems to tie in with various uses of magic. So I'd been away for a few days, came back, had been feeling very unsettled and drained and not feeling great at all during the trip, and I'd not been on a long distance trip. It was European travel, only been away for a few days, had mostly been able to rest that time, so there was no good reason really that I should have been feeling as run down and worn out as what I was, but I was. So I gone to sleep one night, gone into dream state, not aware of what the various planes of my existence while my body were resting, what the higher planes were up to the point where my conscious awareness sort of came online. So it was a lucid dream. It became like I was consciously aware and observing what I was dreaming. So in this dream, I was in my own home, but a sort of different version of it, in the sense that as I came into being present, being aware, what was beneath me was the floor of my then living room, and what I could feel around me was the presence of beings that felt very familiar, very jovial. It felt a very positive environment. And almost as soon as I'd kind of, become consciously aware of being in that environment, I didn't get to see who these beings were. I could just feel their energy. And I felt happy to be there. I felt happy for them to be there, because it felt like, they were in my space. And there was a knock at the door. So where I was in terms of in this astral location, there was the layout of the room would be that where I was positioned, where I was looking at the floor beneath me, just behind me was the door, not the external door, but an adjoining door, an internal door that led to a hallway. Now, the reason I say in the astral, it was a familiar space, but it had a different layout, was because in my actual physical home at the time, that adjoining door would lead to the front door that would be directly on the other side of that adjoining door, that internal door. That wasn't the case in this astral space, even though it felt, everything else about it felt like I was in my home. The door was at the back, so the hallway that would in the physical have led to the kitchen instead led to an external door, a back door, you could say, but that's not the layout of the home in reality. So in my dream state, initially I was in my, what we would class as your astral body. It was a first person account. I was looking at the floor. The door heard a knock, so it being my space and me being the one nearest to the internal door, I was the one that left that room, walked into what was then the hallway, and I was in first person, as in it was me looking down this hallway, and I can see that there's an external door, a door leading to the outside, and my awareness then shifted, as if it shifted from where I was looking out of my astral body. It then shifted as if I'd moved to a different plane of existence, watching my astral body. So I then watched myself walk down this hallway, and what I could see from this new vantage point was on the other side of that door there was some sort of shadowy, cloaked figure, stood sort of head sort of down with a hood over. And my feeling from my point of awareness was, don't go to the door, but I'm watching my astral self walk towards this door. And as I opened the door, this figure sort of flew at me, like jumped at me, but from my vantage point, I then kind of very quickly, my point of awareness, it was as if it like flew into where my astral self was. I'd just watched walk down this hallway, and I'd been looking, seeing on the other side of this door what was there, what was waiting for it. It's as if I sort of flew into my astral self, and there was a rebound that happened, and as that happened, it felt like a genuine collision. I woke up from the dream feeling like something had actually hit me. I thought the camera had frozen then. So it felt like something had actually, in a very real sense, hit me. My nervous system was all over the place. My heart was racing. My thoughts were like, was that? Like, what was that? What's just happened? And the guidance and support that I have were trying to, reassure me, it's okay, you're going to be okay, don't worry. It was an attack, don't worry about it, you're going to be okay, you're going to be okay. And I felt physically threatened, even though I was in my own home, alone, in bed. There was a feeling of unsafeness that for months after that specific event, I didn't have the awareness then that I do now about other elements of this, other aspects to this. So there was such a heavy state of confusion that I had as to what. I knew from the guidance it was an attack. I felt a major sense of insecurity about my own vulnerability, realizing that there's ways and means that things can affect and interact with you that are beyond your control. I noticed some side effects within my own demeanour, my own persona, in terms of, you can imagine, let's say you had, physically walked down the street and someone out of the blue, from nowhere, attacks you. It's going to have a knock-on effect for some time, that you're going to be nervous about going certain places, doing certain things, in case it happens again. And you can imagine if you translate that into that's how you feel just going to sleep, that's how you feel just being in your own private home, residence, resting, there was a definite feeling of, I'm not safe. And it's one of the things that then drove me to start looking at, if that was an attack, what kind of attack could it be? I've come to realise that there are, various forms of baneful magic that could create that kind of effect. The reason why I believe it was quote-unquote death magic was that type of magic doesn't necessarily have to be about a physical death as such. It can be a death to your confidence, it can be a death to your creativity, it can be a death to your extroversion, or it can be a death to an element of yourself or your life that is being targeted. So it's not necessarily the intent on the other side is to cause your entire expiration, but it can be to bring an end to something either about you or something you have. It can be death of a business, it can be death of a project, so on. So when I describe the next one, it'll make a little bit more sense as to, over time, although I knew as soon as it had happened it was an actual attack, I've become more clear that it was some sort of death, some sort of ending that was intended. The type of being that it was that attacked me as well, because it was cloaked, I didn't get to see it very clearly, but it had a very Reaper sort of feel to it, which also, you know, contributed to my consideration and now conviction that it was some sort of, you know, death entity that or ritual, you know, death ritual, and the entity was assigned specifically for that. So that was that dream, quote unquote, that was really a astral attack. So I will, in the next video, describe the one that happened in August of 2024. Right. Okay, so I'm not sure there's really anything I need to add to that, other than that, again, was in conjunction with other feelings and symptoms, and I'd been feeling a lot of what I would describe in the unrest, the feeling of being drained, and then that's, I don't think I have mentioned this actually, that's part of the protocol, if you like, the siphoning energy from. It's not just to try and take some of your essence or will or consciousness in, like to use it. It is for that, but it's also to weaken you as a target, so that when stuff is then projected at you, it can affect you in a more forceful way. Again, I've come to realize that from doing more research and listening to people who have, you know, they've shared what they used to do and how they used to do it and why they used to do it that way. And there's people out there teaching people about this, how useful it is to get really adept at vampirism so that you can weaken whoever you're targeting with whatever you want to throw at them, whether it's hex, curse, jinx, you name it, so that you can have a more reliable, you know, preferred outcome, whatever that preferred outcome may be. And there is, of course, many different types of spells for many different types of effects you want to create. So that was that. Before I do go on to the next one, I'm just going to pause this because as that were playing, I could hear some interference, some background, sort of like, I don't know if it's because my microphone being on for me to speak, as in this part of the narration. I haven't figured out how to mute that while the videos are playing, and I don't know if it's causing some feedback, so just bear with me 1 second. Okay, so I think I've figured out what I need to do. Still out of practice. Bear with. Okay, so here's what happened in early August of 2024 last year. Described for you. In fact, let me. Okay, this is going to be the recounting of the death attack that I had in early August 2024. So this is over a year after the previous video that I've just recorded. This was during the Lionsgate window, early August. Similar scenario in the sense that I'd gone into dream state, I was asleep. This time my conscious awareness came, quote unquote, online, and I was in an unfamiliar place, astrally speaking. I was in some city somewhere. I don't know the city. It felt very deserted, apart from there was a few men that were stood sort of apart, but almost like strategically placed, just kind of hanging around. Just as I became aware of my environment, the thing that hit me immediately was I was trying to find my car. I didn't know where I'd left my car, so I'm in the centre of like a square. There were some buildings, sort of separate, but, you know, like kind of created a bit of a, you know, a square in the sense that I was sort of boxed in. But alongside the area where I was stood, alongside those buildings were different roads leading off, and there were these, you know, 3 men that, you know, that I remember being there, none of who I recognised, and they were sort of positioned. One was just a little distance away, but to the side of me here. Another guy just stood a little bit further ahead of me, but in front of where I was looking in that direction, but trying to figure out which way I needed to go as to where I'd left my car. And then there was another guy that I could sort of feel a presence of in the background. And as I'm recounting it, I was in my astral body. I was in that first person sort of position, but in a similar way to what I described in that May 2023 dream. There were a point at which in this whole thing my awareness kind of shifted out of the astral body. So although initially I could only feel the presence of someone behind me, there was a point at which I could see from more of a bird's eye view what was going on. And so there were these 3 guys, and I got the distinct sense that they were sort of lingering, like hanging around, and were supposed to keep me where I was. So I wasn't trapped in like a bound kind of way, but I felt trapped because I didn't know where I needed to be going. And I could also feel the presence and see in the first 2 cases the presence of people that there was a definite sense of like the presence there was to keep me there. And then out of the corner of my eye, the guy that was stood just off to the side, just behind him, I saw a swirling, like a mini tornado type shape, but dark energy, dark, you know, some sort of dust or like this dark swirl that started, and it grew and it grew, and then it flew at me. And in the same way that in that other dream I told you about, there was a collision, there was an impact. At that point I came out of my body. That's when I could see the bird's eye view of it. And then very quickly woke up from that quote unquote dream, from that astral attack. But the way I woke up, unlike the last time where I was just confused and discombobulated, I woke up to that energy that had hit me. It's like it passed through my physical body. So I woke up, and you're going to have to excuse a very graphic impression that I'm going to do, but this is what happened. So my physical body, self, is in bed, fast asleep. And as I wake up from this event, I bellow from like the, you know, the sort of sacral, not sacral, solar plexus area, like below the heart, all the way from, you know, when you say like, you know, I came from my sort of depths of my soul kind of thing. Yeah, it came through me as that energy hit me, and I went, die! And like out loud, bellowed it, top of my lungs. Scared my dog half to death. She dove off the bed, started shaking, didn't know what was going on. I had the similar feeling to what I described from the other attack, that I wired, you know, my nervous system were all over the place. I instantly wanted to cry, didn't know like what had just happened, what. Similarly, although I hadn't felt support and guidance with me in that experience as I had on the previous occasion. Immediately as I'd come back into waking state, as I'd come back into like physical material reality, there was a sense of, you know, being surrounded, supported, reassured, you're gonna be okay, you're gonna be okay. And I was just like, what? Like, I'd started learning some stuff at that point, you know, because of the other thing that had happened and because of all the ongoing feelings of stuff being kind of like pressed towards me, ominous presences of beings, even when I were on a day-to-day basis, even in like waking state, the feeling of like bleeding out from my lower chakras, this feeling, and sometimes from the heart chakra as well, this feeling of just energy just sort of like being pulled out of me. Because of all that kind of stuff, I'd been looking into more things at that time, but I'd only been associating it with I felt like the first quote-unquote death attack, the aim had been to like do exactly what it did, unnerve me, put an end to my sense of comfort and confidence, and you know, the person who I'd had involvement with prior to that, those events starting, definitely seemed to have a problem with me just being happy with myself and in myself. Yeah, when I look back now, he's a very nefarious character, but we'd not been entangled for all that long. It was about 6 months in total, and during that time I came to see him as a very cold, very calculated, very narcissistic personality. So it kind of hadn't surprised me that he would be ruthless enough to be involved in whatever the kind of practice or ritual was that created that first attack. But because by August of 2024 I'd already come to realise that I was now being attacked by Kim Gogan et al., whoever her, you know, background figures are. And I'll speak a little bit more, if not in the video that this is going to be part of, if not in that video, then another recording. Although I've been speaking about these different people and whoever they're working with in as separate issues, separate events in my life, I no longer believe that's the case. I think it is all connected, in fact, and that would take a lot of unpacking and a lot of explaining. Which I don't know if I'll have space and time to do it in the video that I want to include this in. So if not, then I'll lay that whole rationale out in a future recording. So that was the August 2024 Lionsgate attack. The after effects of that were severe. It wasn't just the mental and emotional impact of that physically. It led to, it took time to heal, let's say that. And getting confidence and courage to speak up and speak out about this stuff has taken since then. In truth, I've only really just, as of May 2025, felt clear enough and strong enough to actually detail this stuff and share it with people. So, the deep state, quote unquote. Okay, so that was that. It hadn't been my intention to make so much of a feature of discussing this stuff when I did that intro caution thing. I wanted to flag it up, and I did say in that I believe that I would explain more about the experiences in. I intended to sort of like interweave bits of it with the reawakening process videos, just, you know, hopefully to reassure anybody else that's dealing with this kind of stuff, they're not alone. And there is information out there that can help and can assist, and wherever I can provide it, I will. Hadn't anticipated needing to spend so much time and energy on focusing on this as such, but yeah, everything for a reason. I'm doing what feels right, so hopefully it will help people, and possibly myself just getting it all out of my system and off my chest as well. Right, so next slide. Oh, sorry, bear with me. All right, so guidance and research. So this is in response to, so how do I know this is happening, right? So giving you a couple of experiences, as you know, descriptions of, and the other symptoms in accordance with my guidance. I've looked at, you know, I would obviously, as you can imagine, asking for help because I was feeling, honestly, straight after each of those attacks, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say there was a sense of dissociation that came with that, as in I couldn't believe what, in each case, like what had just happened, and that there were people out there that were targeting people in these ways. You know, the guidance I received to do more research, to look at, you know, more information around it, I think was more about a grounding thing, as in, you're not crazy, you're not imagining it. There are resources out there, there is help, you know, available. That's not to say that our own guidance and instruction isn't paramount in that. You know, it's not just a case of like looking for answers from other people, relying on them to tell us what to do about it. It can be helpful, but you know, each individual person would experience things differently, so what is needed is going to be tailored, you know, specifically for them as well. So asking for help, I was getting, you know, downloads and insights. Some other dreams that I were having were of a more helpful nature, like showing me certain things, you know, and I'd find myself waking up with certain words or phrases, or sometimes, you know, there'd be certain songs, or there'd be different things that I'd kind of wake up and journal about it because it felt important, it felt significant. I did some meditations and were able to, you know, I was shown certain things that helped me look different things up as well. And then, you know, signs and symbols. When I get further into the Realities of Simulation series, it becomes all the more apparent when I talk about, you know, the overarching operating system of reality. When we talk about, you know, ask the universe will provide, the universe will support you. You know, we're talking about the system, right? So signs and symbols, I know when you first start going through this awakening process, you can get a bit carried away with like, ooh, 111, you know, numbers, and ooh, I saw whatever, you know, I keep seeing ladybirds, or, you know, it can, because how I think about that, because it is a language, you're learning to communicate with the organic system, right? And in the same way that if you're learning a new language, as in you know, foreign language, it's not native to you. When you first start learning, the first interactions you can have with people where you actually understand what they're saying in that other language and you're able to respond, it feels exciting, right? It's that feeling of like, oh, I understood that, and I were ready. I had a response, you know, prepared. I knew how to respond to it. And I see it very much the same way when it comes to like the awakening process. There can be stuff that is more superficial or and I don't mean that as in there's not a supernatural element to it. I'm not downplaying it. But for me, going through this experience, learning more from signs and symbols, there's been more depth to it than just like, oh, you know, I saw this certain thing, or it's been like I've genuinely been grateful at times for certain signs and symbols. So you know, there'll be a session at some point where I'll go into more detail with that. But how else do I know this stuff's been happening? Well, all of those ways, and then doing research. You know, I've been reading books, been reading articles, I've been listening to a lot of testimonies, and there are some very useful content creators that I tend to engage with YouTube more so than other media sharing platforms, but I'm sure it would be the case if you looked on others as well. But some of those content creators are not necessarily creating content specifically to talk about magic as such. For instance, there's been a lot of tarot readers that, you know, divination in and of itself is an aspect of it, is a type of magic or a tool that can be used in magic. But what I've found is sometimes just listening to readers, and again, there's that many out there. I'm not suggesting it's true for all readers, but some of them that I've come across have been very on the money. Like some of what they've been putting out as general content, you know, it's not like, Jodie, this is specifically for you, but it's blown my mind like how accurate and appropriate some of the things, and I've actually gained some insights because there's been some of the things that they've described it as like a story, if you like, within that reading. They've been like, oh, you know, you might want to look into this, or you might want to check that out, or, you know, it can be stuff to do with your astrological chart, or it can be stuff to do with certain, I guess, what we might see as like myths and legends or alternative ancient histories regarding different types of beings and stuff like that, that it has served me, it has helped me in some ways. And then practitioners themselves, as in there's people on YouTube doing full courses on baneful magic and how to do this and how to do that. But what they tend to teach as well is, and if you find yourself on the receiving end, you know, if you're getting hit by return to senders, or you've picked a fight with another practitioner who knows all this stuff and they're doing it to you, this is how to help yourself. So those playlists that I'm showing you there, I've been updating them pretty much daily. I've been doing this for like the past few months, adding stuff to these playlists, and it's not necessarily that I'm recommending them to people as in we should all get into this stuff. It's more about just providing a signpost whereby it's like, look, this is how prevalent it is, and this is how much information there is out there. You don't necessarily need to engage with it, but if anything that I'm saying resonates with you in terms of you think you may also have been affected by any of this stuff, certainly on the magic advice playlist, the reason I've differentiated between information and advice is if I'm putting information on about baneful practices, I'm obviously not giving that as advice saying do this. Like, you know, that's the last thing. So the advice is more about, like, if you do feel that you've been affected by any of this stuff, these are things that I've found that have been helpful for me, you know, in terms of learning more of how to counter it and handle things. So the testimonies I just find honestly fascinating. Again, I think that's because for so long, to me, all of this stuff was just nonsense. So it's like when you start hearing from people who have literally been raised in those traditions, and you know, it's been their way of life, they can't imagine people that don't know all this stuff. So I always find it fascinating when I see examples of people that are living such a different reality to me, that what I take for granted to be real and true and what they take for granted to be real and true are, you know, very distinct from one another. Like, rather than that being something I find off-putting, it, if anything, I get more drawn in a, like, tell me more. Like, how could you have been trained to do that at 5 years old? Like, what? So as you can see, those playlists at the moment are private, but by the time I put this online, in the description box, I'll put the playlist and I'll make them, if not public, then unlisted, so that they are accessible. Okay. Okay, so that does bring us to the end of this part one. How can I know who's doing it? We'll start that in part two. So for now, I'm going to say thank you for listening. Anybody that does come to listen to this, I do hope there'll be some helpful information in this for people, and I will get on with recording part two as soon as possible. Okay.